I never thought this would happen. I knew that demoing this bike was going to be dangerous, and little did I know that I was gonna love this bike so damn much. Well, now that that spoiler is out of the way, I actually really enjoyed this bike so much that I'm probably gonna end up getting one. You know, I was lucky enough to have this bike for about 2 weeks, and I tried to ride it as much as I could during that time. So what is a 951 series? Well, basically, as near as I can tell, it is Intense's entry-level line that is sold through Costco and their website. They seem to essentially be a rebranded Intense Sniper Trail and an Intense Primer 29. And like I said, you can order them direct or you can pick them up at your local Costco. However, what seems to be better is that you can actually pick up the returns that come from Costco at a nice little discount over on the Intense 951 website. So let's actually talk about the components that come on the 951 XC. The carbon frame itself is, as near as I can tell, is identical to the Sniper Trail. And looking at the geometry chart, there is a 1mm difference on most of the specs, but other than that, they seem identical. The only real difference that I can tell is the cool paint job on the Sniper Trail. But if I'm honest, I think I like the paint job on the 951 better. So the weight of the 951 XC comes in at a reported weight of 28 pounds and 4 ounces in a size medium, and that includes tubes. So the bike I had didn't have tubes, thankfully. So now that's actually not bad, given that the expert build of the Sniper T comes in at 27 pounds, 14 ounces in a size medium with tubeless tires. And the Elite build comes in at 25 pounds. So the bike rocks a full Fox shocks. So the bike rocks a full Fox suspension. Up front, we have the Fox Rhythm 34 float that features 120 millimeters of travel, and out back, we have the Fox Performance Float DPS rear shock. So the rear shock features the 3-position switch, which has an open, trail, and lockout. And you know, I never really found myself locking out the rear suspension unless I was on a smooth fire road. In the open setting, there was a ton of traction for the rocky technical climb. So the drivetrain is basically comprised of all SRAM NX Eagle. The shifter, derailleur, crankset, cassette, and chain are all SRAM NX Eagle. And honestly, I'm happy to see that. With the addition of SRAM SX, a lot of the other more entry-level bikes are coming with that rather than the NX. And yes, I'm fully aware of how much this bike costs, but you really have to take into consideration that the bike has a carbon fiber frame. So let's put that into perspective here. If you pick up a frame from Intense that is the Sniper Trail, it would set you back $3,000. Now, considering that you're getting a complete bike for $3,700, even less if you check out the refurbished section, that price doesn't look so bad. So the components worked just as you would expect from a modern day drivetrain. You know, honestly, one thing that really surprised me here is the brakes. The bike comes with TRP Slate T4 brakes. You know, honestly, I've never used TRP brakes before, and my experience is mainly just with SRAM and Shimano. I have to admit, I was actually quite a bit blown away by these brakes. They performed superbly. They never overheated on me, and I felt like they were somewhere in between SRAM and Shimano in terms of modulation. You know, you pull the brake too far and they would lock up like Shimano, but it took a little bit longer to get to that point. And honestly, all in all, I really liked them. They are 4-pop brakes, and I think that really did help. So those brakes are actually paired with TRP rotors, and you get a 180 mil up front and a 160 in the rear. The Physique Terra Alpaca X5 saddle was surprisingly nice, and I've never ran one of their saddles before, and I was quite surprised by it. So on shorter rides, it was comfortable enough to ride without a bib, and on my epic 38-mile ride, it did just fine paired with my black bibs. And if you want to check out those, you can check them out in the top right. So one of the standout components on this bike has got to be the Kenda Regolith tires. And at 2.2 wide, they were incredibly fast while providing a significant amount of grip. It was honestly quite surprising how much grip these tires actually had. I was able to rail berms at Greer without any issues, and granted, it was some of the best hero dirt I've ridden all year, and I ran them at 24 psi in the front and 26 in the rear. I did experience a puncture, but I was only realizing this when I went out to my garage the next morning, and there was a smallish hole in the tread that was leaking quite a bit of air. So I pumped it up, spun it around after confirming that there was still some sand sealant in there. But for whatever reason, the stands was failing to actually seal the hole. So I took the stands out, poured in some of my Orange Seal Endurance sealant, and spun it around, and it plugged instantly. So if I had to make a complaint, I think I would have spec'd the SCT version of the Canda Regolith rather than the tubeless ready ones. So the SCT actually has some sidewall protection, and they're only a hair bit more expensive. So the bike does have 2 water bottle mounts, albeit one of them is in a really bad spot. One is inside the frame and the other is on the underside of the down tube. Personally, I don't know if I would ever run the one underneath the down tube. I would be too worried about flinging crap onto the bottle, or even worse, some cactus. So the handlebar stems and grips are all Intense branded, and they did just fine. So the stem is a 45mm, and the bars were actually supposed to be 760 according to the website, but after measuring them, they were a full 800mm. So lastly on the components are the wheel set. The bike is equipped with 29-inch WTB ST I-27 aluminum wheels that have an internal width of 27mm, and those rims are laced up to some Intense branded hubs. So let's start with the hubs. The engagement on the rear hub was awful, to be honest. There was so much play in between the engagements, and in real world use though, I'm not sure if it really would have made a difference. I'm pretty spoiled by my Hope Pro 4 hubs that have a pretty good engagement. There are no i9 101 hubs or Hydras, but they do the job. So on the WTB ST hoops, while they were fine until they weren't. We were riding at Greer and I struck a rock straight on the spoke and it pulled it through the hole. I have a friend who has heard that the metal on the WTB hoops are a bit soft, and in all fairness, the sound of the rock hitting the spoke was quite significant. And just because I ran into this doesn't mean you're going to. I was putting the bike through its paces and pushing the limits as well. So speaking of pushing the limits, I actually charged a lot of rock gardens, I hit the jumps, I even did some good sized drops. The bike handled them all without any issue, and I'll continue with that shortly. So on the uphill and the flats, this bike felt like a rocket ship. On sections of Palm Canyon Epic, they were relatively flat and undulating. The 951 XC provided me with probably the most fun I've ever had on those sections. The steering is quick and snappy, and I was able to flow through tight turns with ease. So I found myself able to clean uphill technical bits quite a bit easier thanks to the shorter wheelbase and the better rollover compared to my Intense primer. On some of the undulating trails, I found that I actually enjoyed them significantly more thanks to the efficiency of the bike and the tires. Okay, so let's talk downhill. For the bike to only have 120mm of travel in the front and rear, the 951 XE acted like it had quite a bit more, to be honest. From my understanding, that isn't thanks to the JS tuned XC link. And like I mentioned before, I went through rock gardens, jumps, and even did some drops. The bike handled it all without any issue, and never did I feel that I could not do a feature or a section of trail because I only had 120mm of travel. Now, keep this in mind, but I'm not a super crazy rider, but I do hold my own. So the 29er wheels absolutely wowed me. Look, my bikes have all pretty much been 27.5, and this was only really the second time I've ridden a 29er. And if you want to check out my first, check out the link in the top right where I review the 100mm version of this bike, the Intense Sniper. So with the 29er came a lot of confidence, and quite a bit more than when I was with my 27.5 wheels. With the increased rollover capability and the overall faster ride thanks to the 29-inch wheels, the 951 was an absolute blast to ride. And yeah, I said a blast to ride. I think I'm actually putting my primer up for sale and buying one of these. So who do I think this bike is for? Well, I think the majority of the riders who would enjoy this bike are just about anybody. Unless you're doing some seriously gnarly stuff, this bike is going to do pretty much everything that you ask of it. So I recently rewatched a video of Paul the Punter's where he had broken down who should get an XC bike or a trail bike. And he and his guests mentioned that most people overbike and overtire. And I completely agree with that statement. Most people try to run the most aggressive tires that they can find, but what they fail to realize is that there are give and take when it comes to tire choices. So running a super aggressive tire is going to be heavy and slow and make climbing miserable. Trust me, I've been there, I've done that. The same goes with overbiking, and you should really look at the trails that you're riding most when selecting a bike. While I may not be able to plow through some rock gardens as fast, I'm going to get through the feature. And at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that you actually have fun. And on that bombshell, you should check out this video right here. This is MTB Rad Dad signing off. I'll see you next time.